The legend of the Dashagvas who completed their sacrifices during 10 months is not the only relic of the ancient year preserved in the sacrificial literature. The Pravargya ceremony, which is described in the Aitareya Brâhmana, furnishes us with another instance where a reference to the old year seems to be clearly indicated. Dr. Haug, in his translation of the Aitareya Brâhmana, has fully described this ceremony in a note. It lasts for 3 days and precedes the animal and the soma sacrifice, as no one is allowed to take part in the soma feast without having undergone this ceremony. The whole ceremony symbolizes the revival of the sun, or the sacrificial ceremony, which for the time being is preserved as seed, in order that it may grow again in due time. Thus, one of the chief implements used in the ceremony is a peculiar earthen pot. Placing it on the Vedic altar, the Advaryu makes a circle of clay called a kara, because it is made of earth brought on the back of a donkey to the sacrificial ground. He places the pot on the circle and heats it so as to make it quite hot. It is then lifted by means of 2 wooden pieces, and then, milking a cow, the milk is poured into the heated pot and mixed with the milk of a goat whose kid is dead. After this has been done, the contents of the Mahâvîra are thrown into the Ahavanaya fire. But all the contents of the pot are not thus thrown away, for the Hotri is described as eating the remainder of the contents of the Gharma, which are said to be full of honey, full of sap, full of food, and quite hot. The Aitareya Brâhmana gives us a rationale of this ceremony as follows. The milk in the vessel is the seed. The seed, in the shape of the milk, is poured in Agni, as the womb of the gods, for production. For Agni is the womb of the gods. This explanation proves the symbolic nature of the ceremony and shows that the sun, the sacrifice, or the year, is thus preserved as a seed for time and then revived at the proper season. The mantra, or the verse, which is recited on the occasion of the pouring of the milk into the Mahâvîra, is taken from the Rig Veda, and it is very likely that the verse was selected not simply on account of mere verbal correspondence. The hymn where the verse occurs is rather obscure, but the verse itself, as well as the 2 preceding verses, present no verbal difficulty and may be translated. And now that mighty and great chariot of his with horses, the line of his chariot is seen. The 7 milk the 1, and the 2 create the fire on the ocean's loud-sounding bank. With the 10 of Vivasvat, Indra, by his 3-fold hammer, caused the heaven's bucket to drop down. Here, first of all, we are told that the sun's chariot, the great chariot with horses, has become visible, evidently meaning that the dawn has made his appearance on the horizon. Then the 7, probably the 7 Hotris or 7 rivers, are said to milk this dawn and produce the 2. This milking is a familiar process in Rig Veda, and in one place the cows of the morning are said to be milked from darkness. The 2 evidently mean day and night, and as soon as they are milked, they give rise to the 5 seasons. The day and the night are said to be the 2 mothers of Surya, and here they are the mothers of the 5 seasons. What becomes after the expiry of the seasons is described in the 8th verse. It says that the 10 of Vivasvat, or with the lapse of 10 months, Indra, with his 3-fold hammer, shook down the heavenly jar. This means that the 3 storing places of the aerial waters were all emptied into the ocean at this time. Along with it, the sun also went to the lower world, for sunlight is described to be 3-fold. and Sayana there quotes the Taittirîya Samhitâ, which says that the sun has 3 lights: the morning light, the midday, and the evening. The verse therefore obviously refers to the 3-fold courses of waters in the heaven and the 3-fold light of the sun. And all this is said to come to an end with the 10 of the Vivasvat. The sun and the sacrifice are then preserved as seed to be regenerated sometime after, a process symbolized in the Pravargya ceremony. The idea of the sun dropping from heaven is very common in the sacrificial literature. Thus, in the Aitareya Brâhmana, we read, "The gods, being afraid of his falling beyond them being turned upside down, supported him by placing him in the highest worlds." And the same idea is met with in the Taittirîya Brâhmana. The words "falling beyond" are very important, inasmuch as they show that the sun dropped into regions that were on the yonder side. One of the Ashvin's protege is also called Chayavanya, which word Professor Max Mueller describes from chiyu, to drop. The Ashvins are said to have restored him to youth, which, being divested of its legendary form, means the rehabilitation of the sun that has dropped into the netherworld. The Pravargya ceremony, which preserves the seed of the sacrifice, is therefore only one phase of the story of the dropping sun in the sacrificial literature, and the verses employed in this ceremony, if interpreted in the spirit of the ceremony, appear, as stated above, to indicate an olden year of 5 seasons and 10 months. But the mantras used in the ceremony are not so explicit as one might expect such kind of evidence to be. Therefore, instead of attempting to give more evidence of this same kind, and there are many such facts in the Vedic sacrificial literature, we'll proceed to give the direct statements about the duration of the annual Sattras from well-known Vedic works. These statements have nothing of the legendary character about them, and are therefore absolutely certain and reliable. It has been stated before that the institution of sacrifice is an old one, and found amongst both the Asiatic and European branches of the ancient race. It was, in fact, the main ritual of the religion that these people, and natural enough, every detail concerning the sacrifices was closely watched or accurately determined by the priests, who had the charge of these ceremonies. It is true that in giving reasons for the prevalence of particular practice, these priests sometimes indulged in speculation, but the details of the sacrifice were facts that were settled in strict accordance with custom, tradition, and whatever explanations might be given in regard to their origin. But sometimes the facts were found to be so stubborn as to defy any explanation, and the priests had content themselves with barely recording the practice, and adding that it is such the practice from times immemorial. It is with such evidence that we have now to deal with in investigating the duration of the annual Sattras of ancient time. What do you think of the evidence of the Arctic home in the Vedas? Let us know in the comments down below. Remember to smash that like button. There are many annual Sattras mentioned in the Brahmanas and in the Sharuta Sutras, and as observed by Dr. Haug, they seem to have been originally established in imitation of the sun's yearly course. They are the oldest of the Vedic sacrifices, and their duration and other details have been very minutely and carefully noted down in the sacrificial works. These annual Sattras are not, however, essentially different from each other, being so many different varieties or modifications, according to circumstances, of a common model or type, and these are said to be of this type. Thus, in the Aitareya Brâhmana, we are told that they hold the Gavâm-ayanam, That is the sacrificial session called the cow's walk. The cows are the Adityas, the gods of the month. By holding the session called the cow's walk, they also hold the walk of the Adityas. If we therefore ascertain the duration of the cow's walk, the same rule would apply to all other annual Sattras, and we need not examine the latter separately. This cow's walk is fully described in 3 places, once in the Aitareya Brâhmana and twice in the Taittirîya Samhitâ. We begin with the Aitareya Brâhmana, which describes the origin and duration of the Sattra as follows. The cows, being desirous of obtaining hooves and horns, held a sacrificial session. In the 10th month of their sacrifice, they obtained hooves and horns. They said, "We have obtained fulfillment, the wish for which we underwent the initiation into the sacrificial rites. Let us rise," the sacrifice being finished. Those that arose are these who have the horns. Of those who, however, sat and continued the session, saying, "Let us finish the year," the horns went off on account of their distrust. It is they who are hornless. They, continuing their sacrificial session, produced vigor. Thence, after having been sacrificing for 12 months and having secured all the seasons, they rose again at the end, for they had produced vigor to reproduce horns, hooves, and etc. when decaying. Thus the cows made themselves beloved by all the whole world, and are beautifully decorated by all. Here it is distinctly mentioned that the cows first obtained the fulfillment of their desire in 10 months, and that a number of them left off sacrificing further. Those that remained and sacrificed for 2 months more are called distrustful, and they had to suffer for their distrust by forfeiting the horns which they had obtained. It is therefore clear that this yearly Sattra, which in the Samhitas and the Brahmanas is a Sattra of 12 months in imitation of the sun's yearly course, was once completed in 10 months. Why should this be so? Why has a Sattra, which is annual in its very nature, and which now lasts 12 months, once completed in 10 months? How did the sacrificers obtain all the religious merit of a 12-month sacrifice? By sacrificing for 10 months only. These are very important questions, but the Aitareya Brâhmana neither raises them nor gives us any clue to their solution. If we, however, go back to the Taittirîya Samhitâ, the oldest and most authoritative work on the sacrificial ceremonies, we find that the questions were distinctly raised. The Samhita expressly states that the cattle's walk can be completed in 10 or 12 months, according to the choice of the sacrificer, but it plainly acknowledges its inability to assign any reason how a Sattra of 12 months could be reasonably completed in 10, except the fact that it is an old practice sanctioned by immemorial usage. These passages are very important for our purposes, and we will give close translation of each. The first passage may be rendered as follows. The cows held this sacrificial session, desiring that, being hornless, let horns grow onto us. Their session lasted 10 months. Then, when the horns grew up, they rose, saying, "We have gained." But those whose horns were not grown, they rose after completing the year, saying, "We have gained." Those that had their horns grown, and those that had not, both rose then, saying, "We have gained." Cow's session is thus the year, or the year session. Those who know this reach the year and prosper verily. Therefore, the hornless cow moves and grazes pleased during the 2 rainy months. This is what the Sattra has achieved for her. Therefore, whatever is done in the house of one performing the yearly Sattra is successfully, timely, and properly done. This account slightly differs from that given in the Aitareya Brâhmana. In the Samhita, the cows whose session lasted for 12 months are said to still be hornless, but instead of getting vigor, they said to have obtained as reward for their additional sitting the pleasure of comfortable grazing in the 2 rainy months, during which, as the commentator observes, the horned cows find their horns an impediment to graze freely in the field, where the new grass has grown up. But the statement regarding the duration of the Sattra, that is, that it lasted for 10 or 12 months, is the same both in the Samhita and in the Brahmana. The Samhita again takes up the question in the next Anuveka and further describes the cow's session as follows. The cows held this sacrificial session being hornless and desiring to obtain horns. Their session lasted 10 months, and then, when the horns grew, they said, "We have gained, let us rise, we obtained the desire for which we sat and commenced the session." Half, or as many of them as said, "We shall certainly sit for the 2 last months and rise up after completing the year." Some of them had horns in the 12th month by trust, while by distrust those that are hornless remained so. Both, that is, those that got their horns and those who obtained vigor, thus attained their object. One who knows this prospers, whether rising from the sacrifice in the 10th or in the 12th month. They indeed go by the path, and he, going by the path, indeed attains. This is the successful session. Therefore, it is beneficial to the cows. This passage, in the first part, repeats the story given in the previous Anuveka of the Samhita and in the Aitareya Brâhmana, with slight variations. But the latter part contains 2 important statements. Firstly, that whether we complete the sacrifice within 10 months or 12 months, the religious merit or fruit obtained is the same in either case, for both are said to prosper equally. And secondly, this is said to be in the case for it is the path, or as Sayana explains, an immemorial custom. The Samhita is in fact silent as to the reason why the annual Sattra, which ought to, and as a matter of fact does, now last for 12 months, could be completed in 10 months. And this reticence is remarkable considering how the Samhita sometimes indulges in speculations about the origin of sacrificial rites, and how we have 2 facts clearly established. One, at the time of the Taittirîya Samhitâ, the cow's walk, the type of all annual Sattras, could be completed in 10 months, and 2, that no reason was known at the time as to why a Sattra of 12 months could be thus finished in 10, except that it was in immemorial custom. Elsewhere we find a similar discussion as to the cow's walk, and clearly recognizes its twofold character so far as its duration is concerned. Sayana and Bhaskara, in their commentaries on the Taittirîya Samhitâ, cannot therefore be said to have invented any new theory of their own as regards the double duration of the annual Sattra. We shall discuss later what is denoted by cows in the above passage. At present, we are concerned with the duration of the Sattra, and if we compare the above matter-of-fact statements in the Samhita with the double duration of the annual Sattra in the legend of the Dashagvas sacrificing for 10 months, the conclusion that in ancient time the ancestors of the Vedic Aryas completed their annual sacrificial session in 10 months becomes irresistible. The duration of the Sattra must have been changed, and all such Sattras made to last for 12 months when the Vedic people came to live in regions where the previous annual sessions was impossible. But conservatism in such matters is so strong that the old practice must have outlived the change of the calendar, and that it had to be recognized as an alternative period of duration for this Sattra in the Samhitas. The Taittirîya Samhitâ has thus to record the alternate period, stating that it is an ancient practice, and that settles the question, so far as the duration of the Sattras in ancient times is concerned. Whatever reasons we may assign to us, it is beyond all doubt that the oldest annual Sattras lasted only for 10 months. The Taittirîya Samhitâ is not alone in being unable to assign any reason for the relic of the annual Sattras lasting only 10 months in this ancient calendar, or the duration of the annual Sattras. We still designate the 12th month of the European solar year as December, which as a word etymologically denotes the 10th month. We all know that Numa added 2 months to the ancient Roman year and made it of 12 months. Plutarch, in his Life of Numa, records another version of the story in that Numa, according to some, did not add the 2 months, but simply transferred them from the end to the beginning of the year. The names of the months clearly show that this could not have been the case, for the enumeration of the months by words indicating their order, as to the 5th, Quintilis, an old name for July, or the 6th, Sextilis, old name for August, the 7th, September, and so on. The rest are in their order, which cannot, after once it has begun, been regarded as to have been abruptly stopped at December, allowing only that the last 2 months be differently named. Plutarch has therefore rightfully observed that we have proof in the name of the last month that the Roman year contained, at first 10 months only, not 12. But if there was any doubt on that point, it is now removed by the analogy of the cow's walk and the legends of the Dashagvas and Dirghatamas. Macrobius confirms the story of Numa's adding and not simply transposing 2 months of the ancient year of 10 months. What the Avesta has to say on this subject we shall touch on later, where traditions about the ancient year amongst other ancient races will also be considered. Suffice it to say, for the present, that according to tradition, the ancient Roman year consisted only of 10 months. Like the duration of the cow's walk, it was subsequently changed into a year of 12 months. Yet, so far as we know, no reason has yet been discovered why the Roman year in ancient times was considered to be shorter by 2 months. On the contrary, the tendency is either to explain away the tradition somehow as inconvenient, or to ignore it altogether as incredible. But so long as the word December is before us, and we know how it is derived, the tradition cannot be so lightly set aside. The Encyclopedia Britannica records the ancient tradition that the oldest Roman year of Romulus was of 10 months, of 304 days, and observed, "It is not known how the remaining days were disposed of." If, with all the resources of modern science at our command, we have not yet been able to ascertain why the oldest Roman year was of 10 months only, and how the remaining days were disposed of, we need not be surprised if the Taittirîya Samhitâ refrained from speculating on that point, and contented itself with stating that such was the path, or the old custom or practice, handed down from generation to generation. The Arctic theory, however, now throws quite a new light on these ancient traditions, Vedic as well as Roman, and if we take the cow's walk of 10 months and the old Roman year of 10 months, as relic of a period when the ancestors of both these races lived together within the circumpolar regions, there's no difficulty in explaining how the remaining days were disposed of. It was the period of the long night, a time when Indra fought with Vala to regain the cows imprisoned by the latter. Hercules killed the giant Cacus, the three-headed fire-vomiting monster who carried off Hercules' cows and hid them in a cave, dragging them backwards in order that the footmarks might not be traced. When the Aryan people migrated southwards from this ancient home, they had to change this calendar to suit their new home by adding 2 more months to the old year. But traces of this old calendar could not be completely wiped off, and we still have sufficient evidence, traditional or sacrificial, to warrant us in holding that the year of 10 months, followed by a night of 2 months, was known in the Indo-Germanic period, a conclusion which is further confirmed by Teutonic myths and legends, as explained by Professor Rees, whose views will be found summarized in a subsequent video. If you know anyone interested in this kind of content, please let them know. Sure helps us out a lot.